Tell me if this sounds familiar. You wake up in the morning, and I don't know whether this is your first routine. I wish it wasn't mine, but sooner or later, before I get out of bed, I end up opening up my phone, and I start scrolling. You do this, and you start scrolling, and immediately there's breaking news, right? There's been another leader who's been caught saying something they shouldn't have said or doing something they shouldn't have done, there's a big scandal, and there's social media is blowing up about it, and the only thing you can think to say out of your mouth is, of course, right? Because you've heard it before. It was probably the same story you heard the day before, just with a different name attached to it. And then during breakfast, as you continue your scroll, you realize there's a massive fight going on social media about something else. Or you're getting texts about it. Someone's saying, did you read this article? Did you see this thing? Did you know about this? And it's all about a budget number. And maybe it's even a budget number at work, right? Where we work anymore, in the world that we work in, people can make numbers be whatever they want to be. And so you hear about this problem that's existing, and the money's going in one direction, you thought it was going in another one. And then the longer you dig over breakfast, the more you realize it's all fabricated numbers. And your reaction is, well, of course it is, right? And so by breakfast, you've already heard two stories that weren't quite what they were supposed to be that have kind of shattered your trust. And then over lunch break, again, maybe we should just put our phones down, but you hear about something you should take a look at on social media that everyone's blowing up about. You open up your phone and you realize it's an image of a leader riding a camel in the middle of a country that you're like, this is really confusing. And the longer you look at it, you're like, can't people realize this is just an AI-generated image, right? I know my mom's watching this and she's going to hate me for this, but I have to get my mom on this all the time. She'll send me things like, Mom, there's no way that the president was on an alligator in, that's not a thing. It's a fake image, okay? I'm sorry, it's not a thing, right? But it's AI generated, right? And you're like, of course it is, and you've got number and number and number. And then in the afternoon, here's the thing that happens, right? You're in the afternoon, your spouse calls and said, honey, remember when you went to the doctor last week? You went to the doctor, and they said you need to have this scan, and you went and got the scan, and because they said you had to have it. Well, listen, the insurance company just called, and they have denied coverage on that scan. And you're like, wait a second, hold on a second. This is an institution I trust. I give them money. Well, they take my money. They take my money on a regular basis, and they're supposed to show up and do what I need them to do when I need them to do it. How have they denied this coverage? And so frustrated and angry about the last 3 scandals, some of them which were fake, and now this thing that's happening in your own house, you find yourself sitting in traffic on the way home, frustrated more than you have been in weeks. And then you get a text message from your best friend with a little bit of gossip. And they say, did you know that such and such from your small group said this? And you realize the people you care about, right? The people that know you, they've been talking about you behind your back. Right? They've been talking about you, and maybe it's even a story that's not true. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. You said it, but that wasn't the right context, or that happened, but yeah, that's not the way that it went down. And you find yourself even more frustrated. And you're like, what is wrong with this world? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Isn't that kind of like what we've been living in for the past, I don't know, seems like 5 years has been this way, where nothing feels certain anymore. Like we're just cynical about everything and everybody, right? We're cynical about our leaders, and we're cynical about our institutions, and maybe you wandered in here and you're cynical about the church. Somebody told you our church is different, or somebody told you got to come hear this guy, and you're like, he doesn't look like anything special to me, right? We're cynical about almost everything that comes our way, and we find ourselves going, is there anything I can trust anymore? There's actually a word for this. And I didn't know this until I started researching for this series. The word that sociologists are actually using to describe this time, kind of like 2020 till present, they're calling it a trust crisis. They're calling it a trust crisis, that we, not just America, our globe, we are living in what they're calling a trust crisis. And the definition they've given for this is this: when we, and this is just people, when we no longer believe that people, institutions, or even the information we're given are dependable, where we find ourselves with what we call a healthy dose of cynicism. And that healthy dose of cynicism is much bigger than most of us used to have when we were younger. That we just don't know anymore. We don't know who to trust. And we find ourselves receding back into like tighter, closer, quieter quarters. We have that temptation in the back of our brains to just move into the middle of Alaskan wilderness, or move into the desert, or if I could just go find a deserted island and it was just me, I swear to you I could live on coconuts. You said that recently. Like I just want to get away. I get away from people and things, and I just want to go hide. And the longer we live this way, there's another thing that sociologists are really concerned about that's actually going on, and this is more of an American thing than it is necessarily a global thing, but they're actually calling it, this is crazy, a relational recession. You thought the economic one was bad, right? Now that we're in what they're calling a relational recession, and they're actually talking about this thing that like people are receding away from other people. And maybe you felt it. Maybe it's been you. They're like, over the past 5 years, you just found your circle getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And most of us have one or two people that like they're really close, right? And there are people, and we say, well, like at least I have those people. They were the people that you let into your bubble during the pandemic, right? And maybe they're still your people. Or maybe those people that you let into your bubble during the pandemic are no longer even in your life because they said something or did something or broke your trust. And your trust got shattered. And you don't want to feel that anymore. So you just kind of recede and recede and recede until your circle is really small. And most of us don't have a village anymore. In fact, most Americans, it's not just us here in the South, most Americans don't have a village anymore. There was a study that was done recently that said 61% of young adults, that's people aged 25 and younger, 65% of those people actually stated that they felt lonely on a regular basis. In fact, in 2023, the Surgeon General of the United States declared what he called a loneliness epidemic. That loneliness had actually become something that was like, it needed to be contained. It was something that was running rampant and out of control in our country. And if I may argue for just a minute, okay, this is Drew talk, okay, all that other stuff's been dated, you can Google all of that. What I'm about to say is kind of my theory, all right? I think what we've done is we've replaced real intimacy in relationships with false intimacy. Like, we're good at this here in the South where, you walk up to somebody and say, hey, how are you doing? And their response is supposed to be, it's fine, even if nothing in their life is actually fine. Because that's what you're going to do in return. If they ask you how your day is, you're going to say it's fine, even though it's not really fine. And then you take that and you multiply it into the social media culture that we live in, and sooner or later we have thousands and thousands of friends. I think there's like 1,800 people that follow me on social media. I don't have 1,800 friends, okay? I just don't. It's not the way life works for me. And so you have this kind of perceived following or this perceived support system that will turn on you like a mob when you say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, right? And you find yourself in this place where you're like, well, I'm going to keep everybody at arm's length because I don't want to be hurt again. And I don't want to struggle again, right? I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to have that problem. And here's the crazy thing. This is one more piece of science and I'm done with this, okay? Did you know that actually doctors have discovered in the last 12 months that loneliness actually triggers the same pathways in our brain as physical pain? There's been so much loneliness and so much disconnection that's happened in our country. They're starting to study it. And when they studied it, they realized that our brains are like, this is why being alone hurts some of us. But the crazy thing, if we just be honest, and maybe you wouldn't call it crazy, maybe you think it's support, and I get that, but like the crazy thing is, we'd rather be alone than be betrayed again. And so we choose this as kind of a safety breakdown, like a safety net for ourselves to kind of protect ourselves, right? Does any of that sound familiar? I hope so, because this is the world that we're living in today. Now, maybe you thought it was just you. I hope you found some comfort in the fact that we're all kind of living here. But also, if I might just step in and try to be a little bit of a voice of reason, we know this isn't good, right? We know living this way is not what's best for us, right? It's not best for you. It's not best for your kids. It's not best for society. And look, none of us like false information, right? None of us want to open up and be tricked by bad data or tricked by a fake image. None of us want to wake up and like this. One of my biggest fears, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud because some teen's going to do it. But one of my biggest fears is someone making some video of me saying something goofy, because you can do that now and it's not really me that ever said it in the first place, right? And maybe you worry about things like that too. We constantly find ourselves triggered by this idea that everyone on the outside seems like one step away from betraying us. And there's a reason for that. See, when trust breaks, relationships break down. And when relationships break down, life breaks down. And this is the cultural moment we find ourselves in. And when I decided to talk about this, right, when I felt over the summer this idea and I started kind of drafting this out, the further down this rabbit trail I went, the more depressed I kind of got about it for about a week. And so I said, well, God, what is the hope, right? I mean, to me, I'm looking for, if this is where we are, is there a way to turn the ship around? Because if not, why talk about this? Hopefully you know by now, spoiler alert, there's a way out of this, okay? I wouldn't bring this up and just make you feel miserable and send you back out into the world. That's not my jam, okay? And here's what I've come to realize. We weren't created for this. We weren't created to live like this. We weren't. We weren't created to live where people are at arm's length. We weren't created to have this huge, level of cynicism about everyone and everything that exists in our lives. And then I got to thinking to myself, well, has this ever happened before? Is there any way we can prove that there could be a way to step back from this, right? Because it's one thing for us as individuals to say, I want to be more trustworthy. And I think you should. For the record, I think especially if you're a Jesus follower, trustworthiness starts with you, okay? You be trustworthy and prove to the people that are in your life that you can be trusted, and therefore you're going to start a little ripple effect. But can it start on a bigger scale? Can it start on a more, on a way that affects generations? Can there be a massive change? And the more I thought about it, and the more I prayed about it, and the more I read about it, I decided to talk to you about a particular character who's in the Old Testament, which makes me really happy. His name is Joseph. And this is not Jesus' dad. This is Joseph from the Old Testament. This is Joseph who ended up being a ruler in Egypt. This is Joseph who started as a little shepherd boy in the middle of nowhere. But this is Joseph who went through some really, really terrible stuff. And on the other side of it, God did something incredible in him and his family and in the generations that lasted after that. But it started in a really terrible mess. And today I'm just going to tell you the mess with a little bit of hope on the other side. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to unpack what God did and what he did to bring him out of this and hopefully see what we as a people, as individuals, right? We're one church in a small town in the South, but we can make a difference. And we're going to see that over the next couple of weeks. But let me just start with this. If you've ever been in a moment where someone's betrayed you and you thought, I thought you were for me, but you weren't, Joseph's your guy, okay? If you've ever been in a moment where you're like, you had a trusted friend and they were close, you guys were, you were tight, and when the chips were down or when you needed them the most, they weren't there or they stabbed you in the back or something horrible happened, Joseph is your guy. Joseph, and the telling of the story I'm going to tell you today, is 17 years old. It's a young guy, okay? And this is terrible, but it's the truth. If you want to read about dysfunctional families, you should check out the Bible. There's tons of them. Joseph is the favorite child of his dad because he came from his favorite wife. This is why you should read your Bibles, okay? Joseph came from his dad's favorite wife and therefore was his favorite child, but Joseph was younger, okay? He was not the oldest and he wasn't even the youngest. He was just kind of stuck closer to the end in the younger side. 17 years old, Joseph's dad, Jacob, or Israel is going to be called in this, he had two names, actually treated him differently than he did all the other kids. And we hear this. In fact, right before what I'm about to read you today, his brothers got so fed up with Joseph that they actually said they were so angry at him they could not find a single kind word to say to him or his dad because of what they'd experienced. Joseph was getting special clothes. Maybe you've heard of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. That's this Joseph, okay? He gives a big fancy colorful robe that would kind of set him apart from the rest of his brothers. Whenever there were really heavy chores to do, which we're going to see today, Joseph kind of got held back from that, and they all had to do all the hard work while Joseph was blessed and all that. I'm already setting him up as somebody you don't like, aren't I? Like, jerk, why didn't he have to do the work? No, just hear me out, okay? So none of this stuff was Joseph's fault. Joseph was just born into this family. He didn't do anything wrong. In fact, we're going to see throughout his story, he was not that bad of a guy. He just wanted to live his life and do his thing, which probably is a lot like you. And his circumstances went wrong, and the people that were close to him kind of got way off base, and he found himself in a mess that was not of his own doing. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know who to lean on. He didn't know where to go. He wasn't even sure God was for him in the middle of this. And if that sounds familiar to you, then Joseph is your guy. Let me set up a little bit more context for where we're going to go today, and then I'm going to read you the story. So in this particular moment, Joseph, his brothers have been sent out to take their flocks to go tend to them. And they went to this place called Shechem, and in the story we're reading through, you don't get this, but they were like 70 miles, 65 to 70 miles away from their dad. They'd gone a long way. They were a very wealthy family. They were grazing the flocks way out. And Joseph didn't have to go. Now, scholars have argued maybe Joseph wanted to go, because it doesn't ever really say. Like, the dad sends the brothers out with the flocks, and what if Joseph tried to go with him and they said no? Like, no, we don't want you, stay, right? Or they just left without him. Or again, maybe Israel, Jacob, actually just said, hey, I'll take care of you, don't worry about it. They can go do the work and you can stay here at home. Either way, not any of this is Joseph's fault. But on this particular day, his brothers are feeling some kind of way, and they're really frustrated with Joseph, but Jacob doesn't know this. And so Jacob, Israel, decides to send his son Joseph to go find his brothers, and that's the beginning of the story. So let me read this to you. It says, Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. In other words, this phrasing means I want you to go check on them. He's putting them in kind of a supervisory role over his older brothers, way out, and saying, I want you to go and check on them. So Joseph goes, he finds in Shechem that they're actually not there. They're not anywhere near there. He meets a man and said, no, they even went even further. They were about 80 miles from home at this point, okay? So Joseph went after his brothers, and he finally found them near Dothan. This is not Dothan, Alabama. This is Dothan, okay, in the Middle East, not here. It's outside of Egypt, okay? They were way, way, way far out, almost to Egypt from where they started. So they see him, right? He decides to find them, and I've always imagined the scene like his brothers are down in the valley, and they have all this huge flock of sheep, and they see his big, colorful jacket, right, the one that his daddy gave him that they just despised him for, and he's coming over the hill. And it says, his brother says, but they saw him. They saw him a great distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. They were so fed, this is their blood, their brothers, okay? And his brothers are sitting there, and they're in the heat, and they're frustrated, and they're doing all the work, but they see him coming, and they can't think, we're going to teach our brother a lesson. They think, we're going to kill him. Joseph did not see this coming. And can I also just say for a minute, Joseph did not deserve this? So they see him coming, they get really upset, they're going to get rid of him, right? So the older brothers, they say this, here comes that dreamer. Oh, by the way, Joseph had a dream not long before all of this took place. And in the dream, God showed him that one day, his brothers and his dad and all their family were going to bow down to him. Now again, older brothers, they're looking at their younger brother going, I ain't never going to bow down to you. They weren't in control of what God told them to do. They didn't know the whole story, but Joseph, in his little naive way, goes to his older brothers and says, guess what I dreamed last night? And he tells them. And there was another reason for them to just not like him at all. So here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal has devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Ha! I know what I'll do. Let's get rid of him, throw him in a well, and then we'll just tell Dad something ate him, right? It's horrible, right? And we're going to throw it in these cisterns. It's like a well, but in this case, we're going to find out it was a dry well. There was no water in the bottom of it. So anyway, what ends up happening is Joseph finally comes down. Reuben, the oldest brother, who was probably going to be held responsible for whatever happened to Joseph, actually starts talking some sense into the other brothers. And he says something along the lines of, listen, let's not kill him. Let's just leave him in a cistern, okay? We'll throw him down in there. He can't get out, and then we'll go back home. He's 80 miles away from Dad. We'll get back. We'll just say we don't know what happened to him. We never saw him. But Reuben actually secretly planned to go back and free Joseph from that cistern after the other brothers had left. So Reuben convinces them we're going to throw him in the cistern. And sure enough, they grab Joseph when he gets down there. He's probably like, hey guys, what's for dinner? And they grab him and throw him in a well. That was the beginning of Joseph's piece of this story. And so he's down in the well, and the brothers are laughing, and they all run off. So Reuben had planned to go back and get him out of the well, but by the time they did, the brothers had actually plotted to sell him into slavery. They actually saw an Ishmaelite caravan coming down over the hill at that point, and they're like, hey, Egypt's not far away. We'll just sell him. So I want you to just capture really quick what's going on in Joseph's story. He just woke up that day, and his dad asked him to go check on his brothers. But when he finds his brothers, with none of the context of anything that we know, he gets picked up and thrown in the bottom of a well. And then his brothers actually decide to get him out of the well and sell him off into slavery. So when the Midianites, which is an Ishmaelite Midianite merchant, they come by, his brothers pull Joseph up out of the cistern, and they sold him for 20 shekels of silver, which is not even the going rate for a servant. Now, it sounds horrible to even talk about this, but slavery was a real thing in this day and age, and 20 shekels of silver was not that much. They just kind of basically like lunch money to them. They sold him off just to get rid of him. They just wanted to get rid of him. And so then it says that they got Joseph's robe, and they slaughtered a goat, and they dipped it in blood, and they took it back to Jacob and said, oh man, I'm so sorry. Something terrible happened to your favorite child. And it sounds like the origin story of a great villain, doesn't it? Like if this was in a Marvel movie or a DC movie, we'd all go like, that guy's going to be the bad guy, right? And you hear this and you think like, if all that happened to me, right? Let's look at the layers of all the broken trust here, okay? We got family betrayal, right? His own flesh and blood, his brothers betrayed him. And then you get this idea of loss of safety. Like first he was tossed in a well, but then he was sold to a bunch of people. He has no idea where he's going or who these people are, and they're hauling him off to a different country. Ultimately, he ends up in Egypt. Spoiler alert, we'll read that next week. But he gets sold off into slavery and loses all of his safety. And then also, by the way, his reputation has been completely destroyed. But Joseph was, for lack of a better term, the favorite son of a very wealthy person. And he woke up that morning as the favored son in a great family, and he went to bed that night as a slave in a merchant cart on its way to Egypt. Sounds like a really great origin story for a supervillain. And if that's the way Joseph's story turned out, none of us would be surprised. Because broken trust can leave scars that we carry for years, right? When someone breaks our trust, it just guts us. And it makes you cynical, and it makes you leery, and it makes you hesitant, and it makes you distant, and it makes you want to tighten your circle. And I think we can all agree that Joseph would be completely within his bounds to feel this way. And maybe that's the way you feel today, too. So it's really curious to me that when I read the very end, this is actually the very end of the book of Genesis, the very end of Joseph's story. If you don't know this, the book of Genesis ends with the death of Joseph up in his age. But just before that, he has this reunion with his brothers, and he says these incredible words: "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done." And they just had this beautiful embrace, crying in each other's arms, like reconciliation moment. How did he get here? Because here is what the rest of us need. If I'm just being honest, right? I mean, with the way we look at our friends groups, the way we look at our institutions, the way we think about church, the way we think about the way we do life on a daily basis, the way we think about the schools and the teachers our kids are with. I mean, some of you have been tempted to homeschool more than you've ever been tempted to homeschool before ever. And you don't really have a really super rational reason why. You just find yourself doubting. And so what we need is this. But what we feel right now is betrayal. And that's exactly what Joseph felt, too. And I won't lie to you and tell you that Joseph was like perfect from the beginning, okay? Scripture doesn't record a ton of Joseph's kind of opinion about this entire thing, but it wasn't good. And one particular time in his story, he actually talks about the fact that he didn't intend for any of this to happen. Like, none of this stuff was the way he would have planned it out. And so somehow he went from betrayal to hope. The psalmist actually had a similar experience. King David wrote a psalm, and it sounds so human that I just want to share it with you exactly the way it is. David was in one of the darkest moments of his life, and he penned these words about a friend. "If it were an enemy insulting me, I could endure it. But it's you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship." He talks about how we used to go to church together. He says, worship in the house of the Lord, but he's basically saying, we used to go to church together. We used to spend time together. We used to be close. How can I endure this betrayal that I have felt at your hands? It also reminds me a little bit of the way Isaiah describes what would be Jesus' life. In the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah makes a little bit of a prophecy. It's like he looked ahead and saw what was going to end up happening to Jesus, the Messiah. And he describes that entire season of Jesus' life like this. He says, "He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Surely he took up our pain and our suffering, and by his wounds we are healed." In other words, we got something really great out of it, but it came at the cost of Jesus. This is what Isaiah is saying. And Jesus would have every right to feel betrayed, and Joseph would have every right to feel betrayed. And gosh, I'm going to guess if I knew your story, you would feel every right. You'd have every right to feel betrayed. And Jesus, knowing all of this is what's really kind of odd to me, is that Jesus, knowing all of this about what was about to happen, literally on the night it was about to happen, hours before it happens, in the presence of the person who was going to make it all happen. In fact, what I'm going to read to you, Jesus said just after Judas had run out of the upper room. Judas was the follower, the disciple of Jesus that was closest to him, that was the one who gave him over to the guards. He was the one who told them where he was going to be. He set the whole crucifixion thing in motion, and Judas had literally just run out of the room. And Jesus turns to the ones that are left, the 11 of the 12 that are left in the room, and he says this: "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you." Now, wait, hold on, Jesus. Wait. Shouldn't your command be get vengeance? Shouldn't your command be tighten your circle? Shouldn't your command be, hey, keep them at arm's length? Whoa, hold on, Jesus. Do you not know what Judas is about to do? Now, again, the disciples didn't know this, but we do. We have the luxury of understanding the context in which Jesus said these words. He was hours away from arrest, hours away from the cross. Well, my command to you is this: love each other as I have loved you. Hold on, Jesus. Shouldn't you just say, down with relationships and keep everybody at arm's length and move into the wilderness in Alaska? Live on coconuts on a deserted island? Jesus, isn't that what you really want me to do? Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And listen to this. The next thing he says, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You are my friends. You are my circle of people. And lest we forget that on this same night, after Jesus says these words, all of his followers scattered, right? And Peter ran away and denied him 3 times, and this was after he cut a guard's ear off in the garden, right? And this was after all of this betrayal had taken place. And still, Jesus, knowing all of that, said, I have called you friends. You are my people. In other words, and then we know this from the resurrection, Jesus never gave up on these people. Jesus never gave up on these ideas of close friendship. Jesus never gave up on this idea. In spite of betrayal and in spite of broken trust and in spite of shattered stuff, he never gave up on it. Joseph never gave up on it. Joseph became cynical and he became afraid, he became frustrated, but he never gave up on it. So the challenge for us is we think about what does it look like to live in this world today, and how do we take one simple step? The first thing we got to do is what Jesus did. It's what Joseph did. It's what Paul did in the New Testament in multiple places. He just owned it. I think for a long time we've been pretending like everything's fine. We've been pretending like our relationships are good and people are good and we'll get over it and everything will work out. And we've been pretending like keeping people at arm's length is fine. We've been pretending like having a tight circle and doing everything by ourselves and not having a village. We've been pretending everything like that is fine. But the truth is it's not. And maybe, just maybe, step one of this whole thing, if we trust Jesus, if we trust Joseph, if we trust the Bible, is to just take a step in the direction of naming it and saying this is not okay. It's not okay for me. It's not okay for my kids. It's not okay for my family. I don't want to live like this anymore. I wrote a prayer, and look, I'm not going to force you to read this, okay? Some of you don't want to, and that's completely fine. And again, like I said, if I knew your story and I've been through what you've been through, I would probably feel the same way you do too. But I do know that we serve a God who wants to take all this stuff away from us, who wants to set us free from it, who has a plan to not turn us into villains, but to bring us to a life of hope. I want to read this to you, and if these are words that you feel like you can say for yourself today, if you want to take a step in the direction of trusting again, then you can read these along with you in your head and in your heart. Father, you see where I've been hurt and where trust has been broken. Today I give you the people and the moments and the places that still sting today. I don't know how to fix them, but I trust you to begin healing what's broken. Lead me towards hope and trust. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to sing a song as we close out today, and it's a little bit old school, okay? It's older school than what we typically do here. It's a hymn, and it's called "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus." I remember growing up in a little country church, we sang this all the time. It was like the song you always sang when church was over, right? And I never knew the story behind it. I never knew what was connected to it or why. And a couple of years ago, I realized that this song has a lot of a special weight to it. "'Tis So Sweet to Trust in Jesus" was actually written by a woman named Lois Steed, S-T-E-A-D. It was written in the late 1800s, and it was written after one of the worst tragedies anyone could possibly imagine happening to someone. She'd been at the beach with her husband and their newborn baby. Their daughter was less than a year old. And her husband heard a boy who was drowning in the water. So her husband runs out into the ocean to try to save the boy and rescue him. But in the current and the waves, her husband died. And so she's left on the beach, widowed, with their newborn child. And she's frustrated at the boy. She spends an entire season depressed, angry at the boy, angry at the boy's family, angry at God. In fact, she slipped into depression. And somewhere in the midst of that, someone met her and told her God was trustworthy and asked him to give God a chance. There's actually a line that's in this song that says, I'm so glad I learned to trust him. I'm so glad I learned to trust him, right? And that was actually the moment flip for Lois, where she said, I decided to step out of this kind of cynicism that I'd been in, and this anger that I've been in, this depression I've been in, step out of that and give God a shot. Just one single shot. And the incredible thing is that from that moment, God redeemed her and gave her a life of hope. She was able to get remarried, and in fact, she actually moved and became a missionary in Africa. She died in the early 1900s, around 1917, as a faithful, successful missionary in Africa, talking about her Jesus that was trustworthy. What I comforted in that story is that it means that any of us can come back. God can bring any of us back. And if you found yourself on the fence about this whole thing today, about God, about whether God is trustworthy or not, maybe Lois's words are for you. Let me say a word of prayer and then we're going to sing. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the people gathered here today and for this opportunity we have to sing this really special song. Thank you for people who've come before us. God, many of us in this place our trust is broken. Maybe in institutions, maybe in people, maybe in circumstances, but our trust is broken. I think you have healing for us, and I think our lives are better when we can trust. So lead us to that water today. Lead us to that hope today. And help us to realize that you can do more than we give you credit for. We love you and we trust you. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you please stand?